Sometime, look at a novice workman or a bad workman and compare his expression with that of a craftsman whose work you know is excellent, and you'll see the difference. The craftsman isn't ever following a single line of instruction. He's making decisions as he goes along. For that reason, he'll be absorbed and attentive to what he's doing even though he doesn't deliberately contrive this. His motions and the machine are in a kind of harmony. He isn't following any set of written instructions because the nature of the material at hand determines his thoughts and motions, which simultaneously change the nature of the material at hand. The material and his thoughts are changing together in a progression of changes until his mind's at rest, at the same time the material's right. Robert M. Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Welcome to Underexposure Episode 2, a podcast for creatives by creatives, hosted by Ian Harrington, Manny, and me, Kerry Helton. That was an awesome excerpt from the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, a book that explores quality and mastery and the metaphysical and how all of these things come together to make someone a master in their field and a producer of quality things. Awesome read. It actually correlates directly to what we want to talk about today, which is the journey from amateur to pro, and how we know when we're one or the other, or how the world judges us as one or the other. Where are the lines between the two? And in order to know which applies to us or which we fall under, we first have to kind of define those two.
Yeah, I think that's one that was a really great quote. It definitely is something we'll come back to later. But like Kerry's saying, in this episode, we're looking to cover these concepts of amateur and professional, not just in our fields individually, but also just overall. And to do that, the best way is probably to identify the direct definitions of either of those terms. So amateur, one who engages in a pursuit, study, science, or sport as a pastime rather than as a profession. It seconds that by saying also one lacking in experience and competence in an art or science. Professional, I'm just going to do one, and that is participating for gain or livelihood in an activity or field of endeavor often engaged in by amateurs. I think those definitions are really nice in that they, one, relate to each other and directly say each other's or state each other's verbiage in the same definition or either definition. So they're interconnected, right? Amateur and professional, and I think that's a really good thing to realize throughout this podcast too. Is we're not trying to detriment the concept of amateur, because we've all been amateurs. There's probably a lot of you listeners out there that are amateurs, or even consider yourself amateur, and vice versa as a professional in your world. And what we're looking to do individually as well as together in this podcast is kind of go through what we consider either of those definitions to be within, or actually just overall, right? Like we're I don't think we're going to segment it out very quickly. Let's start talking about the characteristics of either of those, and then get into each of our worlds maybe.
Yeah. It's basically what separates the amateurs from the pros, right? And I think it's all in the mindset. For example, a first thing that an amateur might encounter is that they stop at their first achievement. What? Because they felt that they did something great. You took your first photo, you did something wonderful, and you put it into the world. Wow. But after a professional, the way that a professional would see that, instead of stopping there and say, hey, you know what, I that was my great advantage, my great achievement. the, a professional understands business. It's a door opening. It's an opportunity. It's recognizing that you're doing something right. You got to move forward, keep going, and don't just stop there and say, "Hey, I'm the champ." You know.
Yeah, and to your point, Manny, I think one of the things, because it's not just amateur versus pro, right? It's the journey from amateur to pro. And to your point, if you make something great and you stop there and don't continue down the path of producing cool things, then you are stopping on your path to professionalism or a greater understanding of your craft. You're stopping. So I think what's important to identify is that you need to keep a learning mindset, that kind of growth, learning drive behind your work to continue down the path. Because if at any point you make something great and you stop and then walk away from it, I doubt there's any real passion behind that or any real love for the craft, because like you said, that's a door that opens. If you've worked towards something, made a great finished product, and don't see that there's nothing but upside ahead, then chances are your heart's not in that particular game.
Yeah, that's a good point, Manny, in the sense of how could you possibly become professional in something that you aren't going to continuously improve on? I think the greatest professionals are those that are of that mindset as well, forever learning, and especially in media or anything of that digital realm. Like, we live in this digital world now, and things are constantly changing. So if you expect to become of a professional caliber in the digital creative space, be prepared to learn constantly. Cameras are changing, mediums are changing. Social media would be a really good example of that.
I think not just as far as like be prepared to adapt to all those changes, but also be prepared to receive feedback, because feedback, man, as an amateur, I've been there, sometimes you would take it personal, man. Like, man, I don't know, like, just the mentality of an amateur is taking feedback as a personal criticism, but as a professional, you understand that criticism is used to strengthen those weaknesses for the betterment, as we're all saying, to switching that mindset.
And Manny, something else comes to mind too, is that when you're an amateur, lots of times you're working solo. And when you're a professional, you're working amongst other professionals. And to your
Rubbing
point,
shoulders.
Yeah, 100%. And to your point, you have to be able to respect the fact that there are people with expertise in their fields surrounding you that are giving their professional input. So it would be beneficial to you and to your work, really, to not only hear them out, but to take that criticism and be proactive about it, and actually implement the changes that they're telling you, because they're professionals too.
They're
and
telling you for a reason, right?
They know what they're
something.
talking about,
Right.
So that could be the bridge between what you think is good or great work and really, make it professional grade or marketable, right, or commercial grade. So that, and these are just some of where we've identified a few characteristics now that seem to be prevalent in amateurs versus professionals, right? Having limited knowledge in a certain field or in your field, being able to take and implement criticism. That's a hard thing to do, especially for somebody like me, who has an ego. Right? Or we all have,
everybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like letting down that barrier to be receptive.
Right. And especially when it comes to creative work, I know we all kind of look at our own work that way, where it's like, well, this is kind of my baby, and you're kind of taking a shit on it right now. And, it's hard to, detach from that a little bit and be like, okay, what this person is saying to me is actually credible and could affect the work in a positive way, right? So
Right.
I need to accept that criticism and implement it. But
We're also
again,
saying, yeah. Sorry to interrupt. But we're also saying like don't be gullible at the fact like that. Whatever everything everyone is telling you, like don't just accept everything, right? Like
mhm,
be
mhm.
Well, I think
be.
that, yeah, that leads to a point that I made too.
Go ahead.
It's kind of like this fine balance of like confidence. Like you're a team player, but from what I think Manny is also saying is you're also confident in your skills
Right.
as well as the people's skill sets that surround you, because at that point you are now utilizing not only your set of skills but everybody's skills on the playing field, and that is also a huge, I think, professional characteristic, and is just humbleness in the sense of what I just said. You will uh, greatly improve your product by utilizing other people's skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to do that, I think you'll also climb that ladder or fulfill that path from amateur to professional a little bit faster,
Mm-hmm.
because that's just teamwork. Teamwork is natural to us as human beings, I think, and in the creative space, to some extent, it's pretty essential.
Mm-hmm.
There are always haters out there, and that's a fact, right? Like we can't magically click a button like the easy button and say boom, there goes all the haters, they're gone. No. So we also have to learn to accept some, digest it and take for what it's worth, but also learn how to move past it, and don't quit at failure. Don't tend to quit at failure. A lot of amateurs just weren't able to achieve a certain design, a certain photo, a certain project, a video project, whatever, and kind of like drop things off and put all the weight on their shoulders. Understand that to get to a professional, you have to be consistent. You have to fall. You have to get up. You have to scrape your knees. You have to get through this roller coaster of emotions, and yes, these lows to get you to move on to these highs.
Something I want to say before I forget, because I will, is that you also have to be able to defend your work, right? Is I think what we were saying a second ago, where obviously taking criticism kind of with a grain of salt and giving it honest consideration and then implementing it if it makes sense, but also being able, having first of all, having the expertise to be able to justify your own work, and then being able to communicate that intelligently to the professionals that you're working with. So not just being like, well, I really, really like this idea. I love this color palette, or, this transition or anything like that, but being able to articulate the reasons why either the way you had it are superior, or the different needs that your process met that this other process doesn't, right? So accepting criticism, but also having the expertise to be able to justify your own work, I think is super important.
Well, to fill in the sense of, I know we already touched on expertise, but it really is kind of like the foundation of the path that you're already setting on from amateur to professional. We're going to go through and have a lot of these characteristics, but it relates back to the quote that we read at the beginning. When you are at a level of expertise in your field, you can do things naturally. You don't have to think about what the camera is doing,
You
because
act in harmony.
it's an extension of your body. It's an
harmonious.
extension of your mind. And like relating to what Kerry's saying too, is when you're working with other people and you're an expert or professional, however you want to label, or expertise in your field, they're almost an extension of you then, because you know so much about your field that you kind of have a feeling of what their capabilities are. It's this nice cohesive way of working, and you're not just talking out of your ass. You're actually saying things that have truth, and when you
For
have that,
sure. Especially
it shows.
especially if you're bringing that person onto the project, you know, Ian, you already know that that person has a certain skill, maybe where you're not as strong at, and that's why you're bringing that person on, and whatever that type of feedback might he or she might bring at that moment, you know it's going to be valuable. Why? Because you already did that research of networking with this person, knowing what they're good at, and that you're
Right.
bringing him to the project to get this bigger picture done, right?
Ooh, I got one. I got one.
Go for it.
So that I got like excited while you were talking about that, Manny.
I was like watching you too, Kerry. You're just sitting there, and I was like, I know he's just writing.
I got it. Well, you know, I had this little revelation, right? There's an expectation, and this has a huge part to play in the conversation of professional versus amateur. As a professional, there's an expectation that if you get brought onto a project or if you get hired by a client, that you are going to produce a certain level of work in a certain amount of time, you know, with a certain level of efficiency. And that expectation really has nothing to do with you or where you're at as a you know, creative or as an expert in your field. It has to do with their expectation of what a professional in your field does. So that's a question to ask yourself. Where do I stack up to that expectation? If I'm a DP or if I'm a product photographer and I show up on set tomorrow, what are the expectations going to be of me as a professional to produce once I'm there?
Totally. Yeah,
That's
that's so true. And those expectations are set not just at random either. Like
Right.
this is the world talking back to you and saying like, if you want to be on this caliber of work, you do have to fulfill some guidelines of skill level. Let's just be realistic. You have to know things about your world that, to a degree, that make it viable for you to be paid. And that is what we're talking about too. This definition of professional is, what's it say again? It's for gain or livelihood. That means money. That means you're getting paid.
Right.
So if someone's gonna give you something, you're right. You have to bring that expertise with you, and they already have that in their mind. So go out there and find who is already getting paid for the work that you like, and like, you should try to strive for that expertise. You're right. That's a really easy way of just justifying
Bro,
this concept.
you bring on such a good point. Like, go out there and find someone you like or is doing work that appeals to what you want to do. That I did that, man, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna be real. Like, I was going to the art institute, and I was feeling like I needed a little more. You know, I wanted to really be diving in. I wanted to be on a production set. I knew there was a studio available. I knew I had the tools and the resources, and I was making good use of them. I'm not gonna lie, but I wanted more. I was hungry for more. So that it was also that, you know what? Let me look for more, and I went to go knock on multiple studio doors. I went to go. I researched first a lot of photographers here in San Diego that were doing work that, you know, had advanced lighting concepts, that were doing showing mastery at their craft. It was more of like, who's doing the things that I want to eventually do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So after doing my research and making a ton of phone calls, man, I Nick Naka, man, he taught me to be a stalker, man. Like, to be honest, like, but in a good way. You know what I mean? Like,
Popping
for
out
real.
of bushes and shit.
Yeah, I was like, hey, yo, you
Let me
need
get in that
help?
studio, Nick.
Hey, put me in the studio. No, for reals, man. I called so many times. He probably felt bad after a while, you know, like, hey, I probably gotta answer the call for this guy. Poor dude, you know. I'm not giving him a chance, but it was my hunger, my determination to get there. I eventually got an open door, open situation, but I showed interest. I showed that drive, that hunger. But it was more of like, let me research who I want to bump shoulders with and learn from, man, because these people are doing it out there. They're doing it the way that, you envision, you want, you dream big, man, and just get there, get it.
Manny, from that experience, I'm curious to know what was Nick doing that you saw that you were like, that's a professional, like that's the dude. Like what was he in his operation though, not just his work, but like what was he doing at his studio that you were like,
After I started, like, he opened the
right?
doors, and yeah. So, what was not he doing? Like, what wasn't he doing, man? He from everything from tying cables properly to being super organized to having pre-planning of a shoot that was going to be done the next day or the next couple of days. Everything from I started learning things that I wasn't learning at school, but because I was diving right into, like, the bread and butter, the butter cutter, like all that
Right.
good stuff. I was like, man, there's definitely a process, which is pre-planning, pre-production, the way to talk to clients, the way that the studio was cleaned. He showed me organizational techniques that I didn't think about before,
Right.
ways to take care of your gear, and just even ways that I didn't know were possible of taking photos of products. I was
Right.
like, man, this guy is taking the advanced lighting concepts. Like, we really just shot this with one strobe, player? Like,
Right.
for
So
real?
so you touched on you touched on two things, Manny, that I think are super fascinating. And one is that there are indicators of professionalism, things like organization, planning, procedures, those types of things. And then you also mentioned he showed you kind of like some of his own secrets, which is like
Breaking the mold, yeah.
I would call it proprietary, right?
Oh,
It's like
definitely.
my thing. I haven't really shared it with a bunch of people, but I get a lot of success with it.
And you touch on a point, man. The amateur thinks of it as his baby and doesn't want to share it, right? But the pro, as Nick Naka did in those days, he was sharing this information. He was sharing his wisdom, showing me the way to maybe inspire me to do. And man, such an inspiration, man. I give him a lot of props to what I am today, and the open doors that it brought me afterwards, man.
Shout out Nick Naka, man. That's dope.
The true
But
G of product photography.
I think that, like, what you're saying too, Manny and Kerry, is the organization. I want to go as far as like labeling that as process.
Yeah.
Like a professional has process.
It's the
And that-
disciplinary actions.
Right, and that then can be dissected into more subcategories of the process, which could be organization, efficiency. Those are things that allow you to create a measurable method of looking at yourself and your creative abilities. Because like anything that's going to be professional and then in that sense, let's say profitable, and a business mindset, it needs to be measurable.
Right.
Your skills, you need to be able to monitor how your skill is growing. And that comes again from, I think, this concept of process or organization. Are you able to, and that's not just things that are digital, and by process I don't mean like keeping really good Excel spreadsheets on things like that. It's like tying cables correctly, this sense of efficiency
Safety.
on set, safety. Like these are things that once you get a knack for them, you're on the right path of becoming professional, because the professionals all use that same level of process
It's
to
like
a degree.
the
Just
subconscious Bible, you know?
yeah, and like Kerry was saying too, like Nick let you in to view his process a little bit, and you get a little bit, and then that becomes a little bit part of your process. So it's I definitely think that's something that separates the amateur from professional.
and to take it even another level deeper, why are those things in place for the professional, right? Why have processes and all that stuff? It's to protect the business side of being a professional, right? It's to make sure your equipment is stored and kept and, used in a proper way, because you're not trying to buy new equipment tomorrow, or
Right.
so there's a lot of that has to do, I think, with the livelihood side of it too, which is, these processes and procedures need to be in place to protect the livelihood side of it and make sure that that is an efficient process that we can repeat, and continue to make money from. So it's really just putting structure onto the existing, creative model or whatever. But doing so in a way where you can continue to work and continue to mitigate against damage or loss or whatever, and continue to make money off your craft, right?
Yeah, as you continue to do those things, I feel if you wouldn't implement these practices within your professional career or from the amateur transition, even as an amateur, starting to do these little things that, rolling cables properly, just keeping yourself organized, you're investing in yourself. You're investing also in the way that you will go about doing these things. Because why? Because, I mean, we're pros here also. We're telling you guys this from first hand perspective. This is something that is being done, and we can't stress enough how important it is to really do these things on a small scale. It's almost like the compound effect, the small
Get good at the
steps.
little things.
Exactly. Get good at the little things and you will be great at those big things, man.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Manny, in the sense of organization being key, again, to not just your inner process, but also for gaining recognition from a client. When you're bidding out, when you're the entire process of working with a client is circling around your organizational skills, not just your creative skills. To fulfill that goal, you need to have things in place. Whatever, if we're talking about filmmaking, like there's production schedules, things of that nature. And if you're not familiar with that, you will not seem professional, and then also not check off that box of professionalism of fulfilling a sustainable lifestyle, because you won't get paid.
Right.
So I think that's, again, just to harp on organization and process, it's very key before you even touch a camera, or maybe you're an amazing creative, but to get professional, you got to develop these other skills that aren't that difficult, but they take time. And
you know what else it takes, Ian?
What's that?
Discipline.
Discipline.
I heard Manny say it a second ago, and I was like,
Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah.
So there's I saw some like
You
cheesy
will be disciplined.
Yeah. Get your shit together.
I mean, discipline,
So-
that helped.
so-
That helped a lot. You have prior military experience with disciplines like
Oh,
discipline,
100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
we had like we called them ditties, right? They were like short, like cadence songs almost, and we had to and they were all about discipline, like every one of them. No, but I saw this cheesy Instagram quote tile the other day that was like, it was like, motivation is for amateurs, discipline is for professionals, or something like that. And I was like, yo, that's exactly what we're talking about. It's that, man, that's a little technical issue. Ugh. My headphones tried to attack me. It's cool though. I was prepared. So
you're a professional.
Discipline.
I'm a professional. I'm ready for that.
Right.
So yeah, but yeah, so the motivation being for amateurs, discipline being for professionals. It's like, to your point, Ian, we have to be disciplined about keeping those procedures and processes, front of mind, making sure we're hitting our checklists, gear lists, all those things. Otherwise, those things slip. And when they start slipping, you can't be counted on, by a client, by the other professionals you're working with. And that's not acceptable as a professional, right? So there's this there's this level of professionalism that requires us to be disciplined about the processes and procedures we have in place, and that's going to be one of those delineations between a professional and an amateur. If you're not doing those, you may want to look at your circumstance, your situation, your business, if that's what you have, and consider, putting some of those in place.
Motivate yourself for the short term, get disciplined yourself for the long run.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it. The motivation is for short term. It's it's doesn't last long, right?
To a goal, to just
Right.
to you will lose it eventually, right?
Yeah, but
if you don't have that set routine, that set structure put in place.
and what happens when it's not there? What happens when you need that burst and you're at the goal line and you've got to get this thing across it and the motivation isn't there? You have to be able to depend on your processes. That's exactly what happens, bro. The big sad.
The big sad. That's so true. Like, no matter how skilled you are, there have been so many times where I've been running behind. I mean, shit, we were just talking about this today, where I'm just like setting up stuff like last minute. I'm like, holy shit, this is barely coming together. Not saying that happens all the time, people, but it does happen. It does happen. And the thing that you can count on is that, oh, I do know that there's 4 chords in this bag. Mm-hmm. I for sure know that this light is right there, and I also know what it's gonna do. And if you have those things in order, you have, like we're saying, this more ability to not fuck up, but like you just have flexibility on whatever you're doing. Like, you can fall back and be like, well, I know my process got me. I may have blown the skill part a little bit today, but my process is gonna get me through that, coupled with the motivation.
And those things always happen at the worst time.
Totally, bro.
It's always that apex point of shit is about to hit the fan, and if I don't do something about it right now, we're going to have an issue that will cost this whole job.
Thing.
Right. So being able to instantaneously and simultaneously, right, pull from those little recesses of knowledge in your brain,
sleep.
right, that are rooted in your process, gives you the flexibility, gives you the freedom to be able to produce a solution like that and save the day, kind of. And then everybody looks at you like, and you're like, yes.
Yeah.
It comes.
It was just this one chord.
Found it.
Oh, thank God.
It comes down to the point, guys. It comes down to the point of like the amateur viewing the practice as like playtime, right? When professionals actually see practice as a real life scenario, and it's now subconsciously in you, embedded, to actually be in an apex point and be like, get in, I got you.
Right. And that's another thing we have to consider is it's not, again, they point at each other. It's not just how the world views you or how the client views you. It's how you view yourself. Do you have the level of professionalism that demands that you treat practice like a game? Like when you show up to test a new piece of gear or something like that, are you making it challenging? Are you putting pressure on yourself? Are you putting process in place for that? And that's something we have to consider. How do we view ourselves? Do you view yourself as an amateur? If so, why? Do you view yourself as a professional? What makes you think that way? Is it because of your discipline and processes and things like that? So super important to consider. And that again, that brings us back to the going down the path to professionalism, right? Identifying some of the indicators that are like, well, maybe I could tighten that up, and that would help me more down the line as a professional, and continuing to cruise down the path to professional, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice place to transition, because we've talked about the characteristics of professional as well as amateur. Like, I think it's pretty clear, and maybe we'll create something that outlines that specifically from our perspective.
For sure.
And what those characteristics lead to is the path. There is like the hero's path that you go through to transition from amateur to professional. And that path varies so much so between each individual, what field they're in. And it's really good to recognize, I think, that this path, while it has these very similar characteristics, they'll be very different for you. They were very different for all of us. So don't try to seclude yourself to thinking that there is only one path to being a good DP. There is only one good path to doing this. That is just not true. There are similarities to our paths and professionalism, but just like there is professionalism throughout all the grades of the world, like there are very many different paths for
And a lot of distractors that take you away from those paths,
right.
etc. So it's learning to overcome those challenges. Like, I mean, I lost track of my path for a little bit before I really honed back into getting back en route, towards that formal path, which was through the Art Institute, formal education, institutional, but there's always this school and street smarts, finding the balance. What are the pros and what are the cons? There's pros for both sides, there's not, like you're saying, there's not the only this way, you adapt, and everyone's different. That's the beauty of life as well. Everyone learns differently. Everyone has different ways of doing things.
And what's a good fit for you, right?
Right.
How do you learn? I hate that nobody ever asked me that question when I was growing up. You know what I mean? Nobody was ever like, "Hey, dude, like, how do you learn best?" Like, what nobody gave a shit, right? It was always like, "No, this
True.
is the stuff. Do the stuff. Learn the stuff." And it's like, I had trouble, with formal education growing up. It was I liked to do things a certain way, and that was not the same format that the information was coming to me as, And if you're somebody who, does super well in a classroom learning environment, and that way works best for you, then that's probably the best route for you, right? Especially if it's going to save you time and hardship and, all these other things. If you're a hands-on, throw me to the sharks type of learner where you need to get into it and put your hands on it and get your eye behind the viewfinder or whatever, maybe you learn that way and supplement with some formal classroom education or something like that. At the end of the day, to your point, Manny, I think it comes down to, what solution is best for you, because the destination is still the same. It's to be a professional in your field, right?
Yeah.
But the route you choose to take is kind of based on preference.
And you will need knowledge. Like, that's like also the ultimate point, right?
100%.
You won't get there just by, oh, look, I grabbed a camera, I'm a pro. No,
right?
Cause
Yeah.
And it's a finite amount. Like it's a finite field of information too. There are things about a camera that do not change that you will need to know, in order to get a good final product.
Right.
Same in video and same in design software and stuff like that. That information doesn't change. You have to get that knowledge into your brain somehow.
Yeah.
But the way you do it,
I think that
is on
that's
you.
a really powerful, like, again, another identifier of like professional to amateur. A professional recognizes just the fact that there are many different paths and can utilize that concept in itself of seeing that, well, there's this path that is institutional and that may have its advantages, but there's also the go get it on your own street smart path, and that too has its advantages and disadvantages. A true professional can almost take both paths and utilize what he needs from both and make the best out of both those worlds, because people are going to feed you a lot of shit that there's this one path, and it sucks because I feel like probably a lot of creatives have suffered from that and lost a lot of time in
Yeah.
trying to pursue a certain way that somebody told them. Like, you know best. Like you said, Kerry, like if you can retain
You
the
know how to learn.
information, then that's the way. And if that's on your own, go that way. If it's through a guide, a teacher, or a program, then go that way. If you can do both, that works too.
But you have to apply the other things we're talking about too, which is the discipline to stay the course. Because if you are a hands-on, street experience type of learner, if you don't apply the discipline needed to get the information, then you may be more inclined to kind of veer off that path and get distracted. Like Manny was saying a minute ago, you might get caught up in one of the distractions because you've got no real obligation to a degree or a class schedule or anything like that, right?
And
So
just to add to your point right there, like my distractor was like now realizing it wasn't really a distractor. It was something that was going to be my stepping stool. It was retail world scenarios where I was having one-on-one customer service interactions and every day practicing T charts and how to sell, how to change someone from a certain company to your company. And it was, all the people skills, all this like street sales, scenarios where you're just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And bro, it helped me so much now, like realizing it's like I was in that job because of a reason. It helped me build and strengthen my communication skills, all the other aspects that I was lacking on in that moment in life to come to the table or come to the or just dive into the subject matter with more of
the
an experience
Coliseum,
and
show up to with your shield and
just
your
like you know exactly ready to like
sure.
kick ass like through doors and shit. But I was ready, and it was part of like the 3-4 years of retail like detour that I was thinking, I'm wasting my life. I kind of was, but it was like not necessarily view it as a negative thing. And that's what I want my point to be. It's like, don't view your day job as a shitty thing in life. This is a stepping stool for you to become a greater person and strive for that
and
next step.
you're getting paid to learn those skills. You're getting paid to learn the skills you'll need to propel your business forward in the future. Somebody is giving you money to sit there and learn, not only because here's the thing, there's knowledge and then there's experience, and you need both. You got to have you have to have both, and you have to get them both somehow. You can get the knowledge from the streets, or you can get it from the school. You can get the experience from, OTJ training like you did with Nick Naka, or you can start taking really, really cheap projects that are in your field and sharpen your teeth that way. But you have to have both. Somebody was paying you at that point in time to get the skills and the experience simultaneously for as ancillary skill sets that you'll need now or down the line
Right.
to facilitate your business.
Yeah, and I think even those moments where you're not necessarily getting paid. I was listening to a podcast even today by Roger Deakins, great, amazing cinematographer, and he had a question on his podcast in the concept of how did you learn lighting, and he laughed. He laughed at it because that when you're talking about, and this may vary from different profession to different profession, he said that he was learning that his entire life. He remembers fishing when he was a kid, and just you would wake up really early and he would go and watch the water and the light change as the sun came up. Your life is your experience. And I think you really have to realize that in terms of professionality to amateur. You utilize every aspect of what you can of your life, how you see light. If you're a photographer, like, you go out and shoot things and do things beyond getting paid. Recognize the light change in the sky and remember those things, because your path will include these moments that are in jobs, and you will be getting paid for them, like Manny's saying, and those build up the user experience. But if you're in the creative world, you're there because your mind is different. Like, you're not an analytical person, and that's also part of your path. So that's
It goes back to that growth and learning mindset, I think, too. And it's about what we were all talking about, over the past couple minutes, which is, t- learning from your experience life wide, right? All through your life, learning through your experience, but also taking something that you may currently view in a negative light, like a job that you're not pumped to be at, and recognizing that there is inherent value in the skills that you are developing while you're there, right? Knowing that you'll be able to use these critical skills down the line, in your business and whatever your future endeavor is. So yeah, it's all about that. Always be learning, always be growing, always be testing. That
It's
type
like
of
that
mentality.
ABC sales mentality. Always be closing, but yeah,
That's
you
right,
translated it.
always
perfectly.
have discipline.
ABC babies.
Show up to the Coliseum of life.
With the shield.
Oh man.
It's all
For
great
sure.
points, though. It makes sense, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
that.
and then how do you know when you're ready to make the leap, right? How do you know when you're ready to go from say you do consider yourself an amateur, you don't currently make a livelihood off of your craft, and you don't have these procedures and processes in place. What now? How do I know when I'm ready to make that transition? And just like the path you took to get to professional, the transition is going to be different for everybody, right? Because we all have certain variables to account for in our lives that make it different than it is for anybody else, right?
In my case, I had a mentor, that helped me with a very important transition, to recognize those, like you mentioned, processes and all that good stuff. So for me, I had a mentor to back that up, as well as the institution, as well as the hunger to just be, like, hey, let me work. Like, what's up? I want to learn. I want to be there. And it was receptive. That it was received that way. So for me, that was one of the routes, right? But as you mentioned, it could be different for everyone.
And you had that kind of drive to work for free.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the kind of drive you had to get paid.
Right.
Ian, what were the roots, man? Like, what did your transition look like?
Yeah. Well, when I first was starting, and I'm still currently a independent cinematographer, but when I was first starting independently, that was just going out and really taking any job I could, and I think that really helped me fulfill my experience lane very quickly, and also it helped me become very versatile and also learn that business aspect. Like, I was not only just shooting, I was dealing with the client directly and getting paid. So I think that was a really valuable method of first transitioning. I wouldn't even say to professional level, but like that semi-grade amateur, right? Like,
Yeah, that's why I said like a pro mindset,
Yeah, like just starting
you start
to
understanding.
just starting to first form the process, and then
Right.
always just shooting on my downtime. With filmmaking, it's a really interesting career, I'd say now more than ever, because of just digital enhancement, etc. Like before, like you were either in film school or that was pretty much it, like you had to go through that criterion to even shoot independently. And now that's just not true. Like you can do everything on your own. I did have the institutional background, but when I started out, again, like I said, I kind of did my own thing, but then also realized that I needed to hone in my skills on that sense, and that larger scaled projects would expect me to have the knowledge of the film school things I learned, and
Right.
always trying to keep up to date with that, because that was changing. So I mean, quite honestly, I mean, I think this is another asset. I'm definitely a pessimistic person in general. I don't think I'm quite yet. I make money in the sense of professionalism to support my lifestyle. I'm not yet a master in any sense, and that's again always is on my mind of keeping the professionalism up front to sustain my life, but trying to achieve that mastery of the art form is top of mind for me. So
being humble, bro, like that's definitely like like being humble is what you just said, you know, like
Yeah.
I'm not a master, and I agree. I do not view myself as the top fucking dog at
I
photography.
totally
or
tell
this or
people
that.
you two are masters though, because in my mind you kind of are, and I appreciate all the humility and
Yeah.
all the humble stuff, but you guys are both masterful, if not masters,
I appreciate it,
at
bro.
your craft, and it's still just like a real pleasure, like for me, like it's an honor really to work with you guys on stuff.
Yeah.
So I just want to go ahead and put that out there. You humble
you made me
bastards.
blush, man.
Heart emoji.
Yeah, for
You made
sure.
me blush, man.
But I think that's another great, again, just characteristic too of like I mean, maybe not the professional, because that's, in the sense of the business
it's a
aspect.
human trait.
Yeah, just being able to recognize that, like Manny and I are saying, like Kerry revering us in a higher light of mastery. Like Manny and I'm sure have our own individuals that we're also thinking are like, man, that guy's a master, and then that guy's like, bro, I'm
Right.
barely even trying.
It's crazy, right? I'm barely even
Right?
trying.
It's all about perspective and
Yeah,
keeping that
exactly.
perspective that we're all on the same path. We're all eventually trying to transition in the sense of like making more money, living a sustainable life.
And ultimately, like, cross paths, you know, to get to work
Yeah.
with these people that are freaking amazing at what they do. Like, honestly, that's one of my goals, working with the top dogs, like just being part of a project with them, collaboration. I mean, that's part of the whole creative process as well.
Yeah, and I know.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Kerry.
yeah.
Well,
Take it away, bro.
yeah, I was just about to ask you. I know that you had were in a different field before, and
Oh,
then transitioned drastically to this. I remember when you were doing that, and like that, I think was like an amazing thing to see that you moved from that field to another field, from and so quickly too. So I think you have a great perspective you should share on what that was like.
So yeah, I was working two jobs when I first got into the creative space, or back into it, I guess. I've always done graphic design. At the time, I had an independent clothing line running. That's actually where Ian and I met when he was taking whatever jobs he could. We were a small clothing line that hired Ian to do our Kickstarter video, which was massively successful. We raised $17,000. So in any case, I had a day job, and then I was working at the bar as a bartender on the weekends and in the evenings, and I had to do all that just to save up the money to be able to get kind of an entry-level photo video kit to get further into digital media, which was where the passion was for me. And over the course of about a year training up on, the camera equipment, and again, with the help of these two guys serving as mentors for me, I was able to get to a point from a skill perspective and from an experience perspective that I thought I could start taking on clients for this work. And that was only 2 years ago. So I am still only 2 years into this business. But I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to work with some really great brands, multi-million-dollar brands, great creative, professionals who have shown me just a ton about, my craft and things that I hadn't even considered about different different skill sets that play into my craft. In any case, to Ian's point, there is no one way to transition. There is no one path to get there. You have to do what works for you, and also do everything you can and everything it requires to get there. And again, man, if that means taking your ass to the bar on the weekends and working till 3 a.m. and coming home and then waking up the next day and playing with gear or being a second shooter on somebody else's gig to do that, that's what you got to do to get those skills and get that experience. And that was just my personal experience. That's how I did it. Yeah, God,
yeah,
sacrifice,
exactly.
Right.
All that experience too, right? Like it's somehow gonna play out in your creative life. You can't measure it now, or when it's occurring. But if you look back later, you're like, oh yeah, I ended up learning quite a bit from that experience, even though those projects weren't as cool. Like if I ever had a problem on set, I would just have Kerry like throw them out. I'd be like, yeah, bro, this guy is just a piece of shit. He can't hit his lines. Get him the fuck
out of here. happy to do it.
I mean, but yeah. In my instance, I didn't meet Kerry in the T-shirt project, but the moment I met Kerry, like I didn't know he was fresh into this industry of like a year or two experience, or it was natural. He's a go-getter, man. That's why no, it's because you're praising me, bro. I gotta praise that hunger pack, man.
Reciprocate.
To be honest, there was never a doubt in my mind that you didn't have it. You know what I mean? And you're also the proof of people that don't necessarily take those other routes, and that when they're hungry and you commit, like you can get there, you will get it.
That's a huge part of it, Manny, and we've touched on that a little bit too, which is commitment, consistency, passion. Like, do you have these things? Do they exist for you when you're operating within your craft? And if not, cultivate those things. Develop those things.
Add components to those things.
If you lack passion today or right now or something like that, or motivation, get some buddies in a room and get fired up. Call some, do what you have to do to get to that next place. Eventually, you can develop the consistency. You can develop that discipline in order to keep the train moving down the track.
It's also reaching out to your peers and industry peers. It's like back to episode 1, right. Reach out, that now on this time, there's the time to do that, the time to grow, the time to learn, etc.
Cultivate those things. So
yep.
that pretty much rounds out the discussion for, amateur, professional. How do you know what you are? How do you get to the other side? And I loved how the dictionary definitions like pointed back at each other. They were like, professional is doing this in a field of amateurs. Amateurs are, doing this, but without getting paid. I love the correlation between those two definitions. That's rad.
Yeah, I think it just further proves the point. Like, if the dictionary is linking those things together, like they are obviously linked in their purpose too, right? Like to identify, they're there to help us identify what stage we're at. But when we link back to that quote again that we read off before, that deals more with the concept of mastery. And I think one of the actionable takeaways I would like to leave with is in reference to that. Like, while this podcast was about talking about professional and amateurs, the mastery is when you are at a state of flow and you can do things without even thinking about it. Like, that's what you should always be trying to attain in my mindset. You can make your life a professional statement in the sense of being successful financially and sustaining your lifestyle. But what comes with that is mastery. And if you can attain that, you're definitely going to be a professional. Like, head towards the mastery. Perfection never comes easy, but when you get close to it, it's so obvious. It's so
And you
obvious.
might never, and you might not achieve perfection, but if you get sure damn close to it,
Yeah.
you're on the right path.
Perfection isn't attainable, but and that's the whole thing about perfection in realistic senses, is that you're always then learning, you're always striving harder, you're always motivated to push harder. And I think that was such a great quote choice. I would highly recommend that book as well, in the sense of just it's a really good read, but just that sums up the story, and I think is a really powerful statement. Really good quote
Adding,
choice.
definitely, man. Adding to your thought, it's like do not settle for what you know already. Learn more. We can help. And also listen to the Underexposure podcast because we're giving out tips and insights on these topics. You know, this is a platform you can also use to gain that steps towards mastery. I mean, we're not masters yet at it, but we're definitely giving out great advice and true honest feedback to what is actually out there.
Absolutely. And, on our journey to mastery here, it becomes more and more apparent to me that we as creatives live on this spectrum of mastery, and knowing where you fall on that spectrum will be a good indicator of whether or not you're ready to make the transition from amateur to professional. If you think you are way, 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 way down on that scale of mastery, then maybe don't quit your day job just yet. Don't burn the ships. Go out there, really work on your craft, really hone it, really get sharp, and then make the necessary preparations for you to go into a professional space with your creative work, with your creative output. And to Manny's point, please, if you like what you hear on the Underexposure podcast, leave a comment, leave a review on the podcast, shoot us a rating. Make sure you subscribe. We are really enjoying the process of producing this podcast. We have just awesome conversations leading up to this thing, and it's always just super exciting for us. So, subscribe, leave us a review, let us know how we're doing. We want to know.
Yep.
We want to know.
We also want to learn, get more insight, and also just let us know your thoughts. Give us the inside scoop of what you guys are thinking right now.
For sure. So, closing thoughts, fellas?
I guess I can touch on a little bit of gear wise. You do have a camera, you do have tools. Don't lose time comparing your set of tools with others, especially like, hey, I know Nick Naka has a Fuji 100 megapixel camera that I obviously, you can't compare, but what you can do is invest time in learning on how to master or really be good at what you have and be creative with that tool. You learn how to master your tool first, because I can tell you, I started up with Canon Rebel T3i, the T5is, those that are sold as bundle packs at the Costco. You literally can walk in the first couple aisles, take a right, and there's like the $600 to $700 camera bundle kit, right? I started off with that. That's a great starting camera where, I mean, it's not the best kit in the world, but it's put me into the creative space mentality of actually honing in on these skills and getting better. If I could do it with this, I could do it with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, getting the job done. And being good with what you have. Not necessarily.
That's right.
Wanting what you don't because you think it'll make your craft better.
Right.
Ian, did you want to throw out a any kind of kit recommendation or anything like that for?
I'd say in terms of gear for film production, relating back to what Kerry said, the first step, even before getting to the gear, is measure out what level you're at. If you're instantly getting into any field, you don't buy the highest level piece of equipment. That's frankly just disrespectful to the gear. Like if you don't know enough to go through a menu already, don't buy the highest piece of equipment. It's frankly time wasting, because all the pieces of equipment also have like a base, like we were talking about the other day. Like if you know menu systems pretty quickly, like you'll realize that all menu systems are the same. Like you want to learn that base level of knowledge, and that is dependent in the scale of professional and amateur. What profession are you looking to get into? Do you want to be a wedding videographer? Do you want to be a full-scale DP? Do you want to shoot conferences? That will highly dictate what piece of equipment you will get. I'd say start there. Be organized. Think about the direction you want to go, and then strike out on the equipment, because there's so many resources out there on what to learn, and there's a lot of equipment out there. So don't get hung up on that first, and you won't regret that buy you have, because I went through the process of buying pieces of gear that I didn't really need. I found out it wasn't versatile for the things I do. And I somewhat regret that. I learned a few things from gear that I don't use any longer. But what I wish I would have done was really pinpointed what I wanted. And I'm at that stage now where if I own a piece of equipment, I know that it's going to serve all the purposes. It's going to check all the boxes before it ever enters my, the shopping cart.
Arsenal.
And,
Yep.
So,
and of course, I'm going to jump in on like the designer perspective or whatever. So, yeah, to kind of counter the hardware advice and guidance that Manny and Ian are giving, I'm a huge proponent of, being good and being efficient with the software side of things. And I'm a huge proponent of the Adobe Creative Suite. When I first got into the graphic design side of my craft back in it was like late 2009-ish, 2008, 2009. Once I got into the Adobe Creative Suite, I started to learn how to translate my pencil to paper art into digital graphic art. And that's where that was the first time I thought I could make money doing this, and once I got proficient in Adobe Illustrator and some of the Photoshop, some of the base Adobe software systems, those tools permeate the entire Creative Suite. So if you get really good at working with the pen tool in Illustrator, there's a pen tool in Premiere Pro, which is the industry standard film editing software I use from Adobe. So, and I'm not plugging any brands here or anything. I'm just telling you who's
Adobe.
I'm just telling you who's the best doing it right now from a suite perspective, and that's who it is. And so in any case, if you get proficient and efficient with the software that you're using, it's going to save you a ton of time on the back end, which means a quicker turnaround, which means you can finish projects faster and get new clients in the door. In any case, get good with the software, especially if it's something in the Adobe Creative Suite. That's a good place to start, and it's also an industry standard for final production.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same mindset of also learn your tools before you go out into the.
It's because there's touching on programs and stuff like that. It's such a wide spectrum, right? Because for example, for photography, everyone does Lightroom, right? Where it's the Adobe suite, but in the commercial world, in the actual real world scenarios, they're using Capture One. So it's like there's things that I was learning in school is like now I mentor through the mentor program that I got myself into by knocking them doors. It was like, hey, they're actually using different tools, and I wouldn't have understood that if I wouldn't have dove in beforehand.
So like Robert Persig said, the master is the creative or professional or however you want to view it that can work with the material and his mind simultaneously to achieve the end result that he is truly after, and continuing to have a growth mindset, continuing to have a learning mindset, and self-enforcing the discipline to have processes, procedures, working with other professionals. All of these things are going to help you move from amateur to professional. But for us, for we three creatives, the consensus is we want to be masters in our field, right? We are professionals because we all make a living doing this, being creatives, and doing great work for brands we love. We have the opportunity to do this, and we're fortunate enough to be able to, and to be honest, these guys have all worked hard enough to be able to make it their profession. So being an amateur, being a professional, really, you can decide that, and whether or not you're able to make a living off it decides that. But your mastery is a lifelong pursuit, and it's something we have all committed to at scale, with our profession, but also as creatives, is becoming masters in our field. And we encourage you to follow on that path as well. And for episode 2 of Underexposure, this has been awesome. And thank you guys, and thanks everyone watching and listening. I'm Kerry Helton.
Ian Harrington.
And Manny Aqua.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.